inherent differences between males and females in every species. Like women are not small men. Mice are not small humans. Yep. There's a lot of nuance there. And I think for better or worse, the male body has been biology's baseline for the last 100 years. And so we have a century of clinical and preclinical data that was primarily collected in males. And what that means is that we're playing catch up, and we don't really have a lot of data on females. We don't understand female physiology. And at the basis of all of this, if you're talking about aging and you don't talk about ovaries and females, then you've sort of missed the boat.
Collective Insights is a voyage through topics and technologies revolutionizing human well-being. Groundbreaking approaches for a better world and a better life await you. Welcome to Collective Insights.
Hi, I'm Dr. Dan Stickler. Before we get into this week's episode, I wanted to share with you about a protocol I'm passionate about in my practice. Now, everyone wants to slow down aging, but most of us aren't sure how to do it the right way. And there's something that I recommend that everyone can do, and it takes just 2 days a month. It's a bodily cleanse that helps get rid of old defective cells, these cells we call senescent cells. They're shown to be related to so many symptoms of poor aging. This is something that all of us need to address as we age. This bodily cleanse is a supplement which contains a group of ingredients that we call senolytics. New research on aging and longevity, including a clinical study on Qualia senolytic, shows that senolytic supplementation can play a huge role in enhancing how we age. Senolytic ingredients help our body flush senescent cells, supporting repair and rejuvenation from muscles to joints to even how we feel every day. To learn more about senolytic research and to try Qualia senolytic risk-free for 100 days, go to qualialife.com/podcast offer and use the code podcast for an additional 15% off.
Today, we're excited to welcome Dr. Jennifer Garrison. She's a neuroscientist and faculty member at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging, where she leads groundbreaking research on female reproductive aging and its impact on overall health. As the co-founder and executive director of ProductiveHealth.org, she advocates for advancing science focused on understanding the fundamental drivers of female aging. Dr. Garrison's lab investigates the complex brain-ovary connection, exploring how age-related changes in this chemical conversation may lead to accelerated aging in females, with the ultimate goal of extending women's health span. Let's dive right in. Thank you for joining us here today. For our listeners, you're a neuroscientist with a focus on healthy aging for women, particularly with the ovarian brain connection. And I was thinking maybe we could start there and you just share with our listeners what that is and what it means.
Sure, yeah. I am a neuroscientist by training, but I have a research lab at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging. And my lab really focuses on trying to understand how the brain talks to the rest of the body and how that conversation changes with aging, and then thinking through potential intervention points for how we might impact aging. So, your brain, honestly, I'm totally biased, so don't, take all of this with a grain of salt, but your brain is really the master regulator for everything in your body. But it's not, it's not controlling things like a dictator. It's constantly listening to and integrating feedback. And so there's like this two-way chemical conversation that's going on between your brain and every organ in your body. And it's mediated by a lot of different kinds of signaling molecules. So I don't want to, make it sound too simple. It's pretty complex, but bioactive peptides, lipids, small molecules, all of these things can mediate this kind of chemical conversation. And when I started my lab 10 years ago now, I was really interested in thinking through, what are the most upstream intervention points that we can think through for aging. Many of my colleagues, very importantly, study the downstream consequences of aging and how we can potentially repair damage that's already been done. But I was really wondering what are the most upstream things where we can target? So I was really fascinated with bioactive peptide signaling and the part of the brain that really controls homeostatic systems. So, I'm talking about hypothalamus, right? So hypothalamus is really where and to be clear, a neural circuit is groups of neurons in different parts of your brain that all talk to each other in different ways and to control something. But the command neurons for most homeostatic circuits are located in the hypothalamus, as you said correctly. And when I think of systemic aging, and I'm talking about normal aging, not diseases of aging, really the things that go wrong first, what are they?
A lot of them are there, right? Sleep regulation and even, metabolism, hydration, with that body temperature control, body clock is in the...
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you hit 4 of them. The last one is reproductive function.
Sex drive, I would have...
Well, and in females, like fully being fertile. Those are the things that I see go wrong first during aging. And this part of the brain, hypothalamus, is like the most neurochemically diverse part of the brain. And it makes and utilizes lots of these long-range signaling molecules. And so there's also this piece of data that was just coming online when I started my lab, which was that, there are hot spots of inflammation that happen with age in the brain. Inflammation obviously goes up kind of all over your body during aging, but in the brain, it's not uniform. So there are hot spots, and one of them is in the hypothalamus. So my kind of simplistic view at the time was, well, all right, so there's this increase in inflammation in the hypothalamus. Maybe that's leading to dysregulation of these neurons that control these homeostatic circuits, and that might be kind of what we're observing with age, right? And that maybe it's related to dysregulation of these long-range signaling molecules. So that's where we started, and we spent a lot of time building tools to study homeostatic circuits, and it's not straightforward when you're talking about a signaling molecule that's released in one place that has receptors potentially all over the place, but that has to signal over long distances and long time scales, and it's not an easy question to answer.
Yeah, when I would imagine... I know leptin as a signaling molecule with fat cells, but that ties into reproduction.
Well, leptin is a protein hormone,
Yeah.
right? And then the word hormone, people get really confused about what we mean when we say hormones. But hormone is just an umbrella term that means any signaling molecule that transmits information over long distances. So what we are talking about are hormones. Not all bioactive peptides are hormones. Not all hormones are bioactive peptides, so it's a little bit confusing. Leptin is a protein hormone that your fat makes. That it's essentially a way for your brain to know how much fat you have. And it's complicated. Like, it's all really complicated.
Yeah, it's one of the things, the more you know, the more complicated often.
Yeah,
it's like
totally.
I think of it like the biochemistry I would have taken back in the early 90s, 92, 93. There was just huge swaths of things we don't know. Like the further someone's tunneled into understanding, like, oh my goodness, there's this entire level below that we never even knew.
Yeah, it's like that all the time, right? With everything. So maybe like 6 years ago, we were hunting down the mechanism by which one of these bioactive peptides actually influences aging. And it turned out to be working through the reproductive system. And so we sort of backed into this area. This was definitely not an area that I went into on purpose. And that really dovetailed with us starting a center at Buck Institute to study healthy aging in women. And since then, pretty much my entire research program, my own lab at Buck Institute is focused now on these questions about how brain-ovary signaling essentially is important for health span in women. But then we also, the center that we started was really meant to be like a paradigm shifting idea to think about aging in women through the lens of reproductive function, like thinking about how ovaries influence aging in the rest of the body.
I was going to say, I had your center, the website, because I looked at it. And there was things just on that I learned from, and so I didn't realize that the ovaries age so much quicker than some other tissues in women.
Yeah, they're aging at like an accelerated rate. So I think it's important to point out that women do live longer than men on average by a few years. But if you're lucky enough to make it to old age and you're female, you're going to spend a significantly longer portion of your life in poor health. Meaning, another way to say that is that females have shorter health spans at baseline than males.
Yeah, and on average, it's like, a third of cat.
It's dramatically different for females, and that's because ovaries are aging faster, like approximately 2.5 times faster if you're thinking about it from a functional standpoint. So I think from my perspective, if we're talking about extending healthy longevity, and I think we've made really great strides. I mean, we collectively as a research community have made lots of discoveries and are making, I think, really great strides in extending healthy longevity over the last 20 years. But as we do that, if we don't consider this disparity really between males and females, then we're going to make sort of inequality worse and not better.
Yeah, well, I know just in, often a model organism for longevity research would be shorter lived species like mice.
Yeah, totally.
And that, quite commonly a compound that may extend longevity in male mice won't work at all in female mice.
Yeah.
So
as it turns out, there's the inherent, and we're talking about biological sex, not gender. There are inherent differences between males and females in every species. Like women are not small men.
Mm-hmm.
Mice are not small humans.
Yep.
There's a lot of nuance there. And I think for better or worse, the male body has been biology's baseline for the last 100 years. And so we have a century of clinical and preclinical data that was primarily collected in males. And what that means is that we're playing catch up, and we don't really have a lot of data on females. We don't understand female physiology. And at the basis of all of this, if you're talking about aging and you don't talk about ovaries and females, then you've sort of missed the boat.
Well, so much, at least in the animal kingdom, longevity and reproduction are married, right? If a lot of the signaling pathways, I believe I'm in the zip code of correct on this, but I might not be.
It's okay.
Like calorie restriction, part of it is, okay, like we need to know, look, environment doesn't look conducive to reproduction. Maybe I can, shift things in such a way that I'll extend longevity because there may be a better time in the future.
You're talking about the disposable stomach theory in a way?
Yeah.
I think, if we're going to get into theories around aging, I think that there are aspects of all of them that are probably have some amount of, that are contributing in some way, but none of them actually fully works. And I'm not an evolutionary biologist, so this is not my area of expertise by any stretch of the imagination. But we do have an evolutionary geneticist in our center, Dina Amira, who has studied the evolution of the female form for her whole career. So the evolution of pregnancy and menstruation during her training. And now she has a grant from us actually to study the evolution of menopause. And these questions of like, why does X exist in humans it's fascinating. And oftentimes, if you can answer those evolutionary questions, it gives you a clue about the underlying mechanisms that then actually provide, it's not just like intellectual fun, it's like actually provides targets and information that's actionable, around interventions.
And I tend to oversimplistically think that a lot of what our brain does is about predicting future. And
totally.
And so it's always taking inputs from our environment, our history, and then mapping those to our genetics and like, okay, what's the most sensible thing for me to do right now?
Yeah.
And so with that, I guess, lens, maybe, I would love you to just maybe share some of your work and some of the things that you think would be most important take-home points for our listeners that, like me, are new to the importance of your work.
My name is James Schmachtenberger, CEO of Qualia, and I want to invite you to participate in the creation of our products. At Qualia, rigorous science is a top priority. That's why we research thousands of clinical studies and even do formal studies on our actual products. But we also rely on and value the feedback from you, our community. Qualia Beta Program is your chance to experience products before they ever go to market and influence the ways that we can make them even better. You'll get to participate in pilot studies to tell us what you do and don't like about products, and even participate in product surveys to influence which products we're focused on making. Think of our beta program as your chance to work hand in hand with our science team, deeply influencing the quality and creative direction of our products. So go to qualialife.com/beta to join our group of health enthusiasts who get to be the first in the world to try our new products and to truly shape the future of the Qualia brand. That's qualialife.com/beta. We hope to collaborate with you soon.
Well, I'm going to step back and talk about not just my work, because as exciting as my work is, I think there's a larger lens here, which is that we've sort of tried to seed a new field that's at the interface of longevity research and aging biology and reproductive biology. We're calling it reproductive aging, although honestly, I'm right in the middle of telling everybody to stop calling them reproductive organs. I think that by calling them reproductive organs, we have allowed like all of women's health to be pigeonholed through the lens of fertility and kind of made it small, like a niche subcategory of medicine instead of half the population. So call them testes and uterus and fallopian tubes and ovaries. Don't call them reproductive organs, because at least for ovaries, and actually true for those other organs as well, they do other stuff, right? They're for more than just baby making. So ovaries sit, much like the brain, sit at the center of a really complex signaling network. And ovaries are talking to almost every tissue in a woman's body: skin, brain, bone, liver, heart. And we don't know much about those axes of communication, right? Like I said, we're coming from a century of not really studying female bodies. But what we can say is what we know about from when they're not there, right? When we take them away or when the function goes down dramatically, that they are promoting health. So I think about them as like the architects of health in a female bodies. Does that make sense?
So I think it's a lovely metaphor. So
And also the pacemaker, or they set the rate of aging, right? At and after menopause, at least at a cellular level, aging speeds up by something like 6 to 10%. And as the architects of health in female bodies, I think it's important to point out that they're important for health at every age. So we kind of bookend, and my thinking has evolved on this over the last 6 years. I think we bookend the conversation with fertility and menopause, and that is just that it gets much more expansive than that. If ovaries aren't working properly at any age, it uncovers different health risks. And what health risks and what diseases might you be susceptible to depend on your age, your genetic background, and your environmental exposures. And so when we talk about this, 1 in 3 women suffers from some sort of health issue related to ovarian dysfunction. And that extends from girls who are, 10 years old all the way through death. So my research was really focused around trying to actually discover more of the words in the chemical conversation between brain and ovaries. So when you think about what ovaries make, most people will say estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. And those are 3 really important signaling molecules that mediate some of these conversations. But imagine that there are dozens of other things, dozens at least, that ovaries produce that are really important for those axes of communication. So understanding what they are, and then asking how they change with age, that's what we mostly do in my lab. 4 years ago, when we were building the center at Buck, we sort of recognized that almost nobody was focused on these questions. And not because they're not important, right? They're clearly important, not because they're not interesting, but because there has been no funding, like zero funding. Very little funding for women's health research to begin with. And of that, like infinitesimally small amount of money going towards studying ovarian aging. So we started a global consortium that was meant to take what we were doing at Buck Institute and really extend it throughout the world to try to build this field, to try to get as many creative scientists and clinicians thinking about this problem as we could find, and also to bring into the conversation everyone who has an interest in the space. So to build out the ecosystem around these questions, to bring in early stage founders and pharma and biotech and VC investors and governmental funding agencies and policymakers, and to bring them all together so that as we're building this, discoveries in the lab get translated into things that will benefit women faster. And one of the first things we started doing was giving away grants.
Wow.
And the goal here really is to fund the science, right? So to explode research in this space until the other larger funding bodies come, wake up and just come in and start funding these things. We're filling a gap there. So we've given away money to 49 scientists all over the world. And over the last 4 years, the discoveries that have been made are really impactful and impressive. And so I can talk about lots of different kinds of work related to ovarian function, from everything spanning potential new biomarkers and diagnostics through to maybe some research that will hopefully give us some clues about what those underlying drivers are. Because at the end of the day, right now, what we have everything we have available for women, things you would categorize as femtech, as much as I
Mhm.
hate that word. We don't call it dude tech,
No,
do we?
no.
No. So why call it femtech? Why can't we just call it like tech? Femtech products all the way through to, things that we hope will at one day move the needle. Yeah, at the end of the day, we're just at the beginning. So I don't know what you want to hear about.
I know what Buck Institute of Aging and how prominent a research that is, but I was just thinking, maybe some of our listeners aren't as aware
Oh yeah.
of all the groundbreaking. So like cellular senescence and Judith Campisi, who's passed away, I
Yeah.
think of her as like,
A pioneer.
yeah. So maybe
Yeah.
before we shift into that, just set the backup for what an important scientific endeavor.
Yeah. So Buck Institute is an independent research institute we're in Marin County, which is just north of San Francisco. So it's kind of like the Broad or the Salk. People have probably heard of those. And it's academic. So we're 100% academic. So we have, researchers who have labs there that study everything related to aging. And the thesis is, for most diseases, most chronic diseases of the modern world, things like cancer, neurodegeneration, autoimmune disorders, all this kind of chronic disease, the number one risk factor for every single cardiovascular disease, every single one of these is your age and not your cholesterol or whether or not you have the ApoE4 allele. Just it really is your age. And so the idea behind it and the promise behind studying aging is that if we can understand what's driving aging, then we can target those mechanisms to basically tackle all of these age-related diseases at the same time. And so if you buy that,
I buy it. That personally,
I buy it. I mean, I drank the Kool-Aid a long time ago. There's no more important research question than we could pursue, right? Because I think tackling things, especially those age-related diseases we just listed, tackling them one at a time, when you get to older age, if you're lucky enough to live to old age, you will experience one or more age-related disease in those last few decades of life. And it's like playing whack-a-mole, right? So cure cancer, all cancer tomorrow, that'll add 3 years to life expectancy, and you will absolutely get one of those other things. And so it's like, it's one of these games that doesn't really make sense.
polypharmacy would be how I would describe it. It's super common as people get older that they're on many medications, managing all of these different,
Right.
diagnoses, and many of them would have some of the same underlying
Causes. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, some of my colleagues at Buck, we have researchers, aging is the umbrella. We have a lot of a breadth of science that we do. We have yeast geneticists working in yeast, all the way up to some of my colleagues are gerontologists who see patients at the VA. And those gerontologists I have so much respect for them because what you just described, the polypharmacy around just how complex it is to take care of someone who is in the last few decades of their life in terms of not just their physiology, but thinking about all these interactions and not in looking at like the whole system and the whole person as opposed to like one organ system at a time. So difficult.
It's not what the current system was optimized.
No, not at all.
No.
But I mean, the promise too of personalized, individualized medicine and hopefully, turning things around to be preventative rather than reactive, rather than treating disease, preventing disease. All of that is moving towards, what will hopefully be also better care towards end of life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess shifting gears, and I know it's very early in building out the science that
Yeah.
pioneering, but is there any things maybe diet, lifestyle that you would currently know of that may make at least a small difference in slowing ovarian aging?
Yeah. So, I mean, we're at the very beginning, and it's hard sometimes for me to explain succinctly how primitive our knowledge is. Maybe this is a good analogy. Can you name some some cell types in your heart?
Immediately go to like Purkinje cells and
Those are neurons, but yeah.
That's right. I know
Yeah.
pacemaker cells, there's cardiocytes, there's
Yeah.
like even in joints, I know there's chondrocytes and there's many like immune cells.
Right. And you could probably name a bunch of different kinds of immune cells. You probably name a bunch of different kinds of neurons. For ovaries, We funded through some of our grants some of the very first large-scale omics studies in ovaries as they age. So human and mouse ovaries, looking at like either spatially or just at the single cell level, what was there. And since then, 4 years ago, there have been dozens of other investigators who've come into the field. It's really exciting and amazing. And we have now all these single cell data sets for ovaries, and we can't compare across them because we literally had never gotten together as a field to say, what is a cell type in the ovary? What do we call it? What's the ontology of the cell types in the ovary? And so we did that. We had what we called a cell types jamboree meeting for uterus, fallopian tubes, and ovaries a few months ago, where we brought all these scientists together, and we literally just sat in a room for 4 days and decided what to call cell types in the ovary and the fallopian tubes and the uterus, so that we can compare across these large data sets. That's where we're at in terms of like the research. It's primitive. So, and what we do know is that all of the pathways and mechanisms that we so far know are important for aging, mTOR signaling, NAD signaling, mitochondrial function, that those are also operating in ovaries. It's just that ovaries are aging at an accelerated rate. So anything that we know that impacts aging in the rest of the body will also impact either positively or negatively aging in ovaries. So, I mean, unfortunately, the best medicine we have right now is diet and exercise, like what you put into your body and how you move it. That also extends to ovarian function. One thing I would say is when I talk to young women, women in their teens and 20s, I try to make the point that, for my generation and for everybody who's older than me, I think we mostly treated our menstrual cycle as a necessary evil that we had to deal with. And we certainly didn't talk about it a lot. And I don't think we spent a lot of time thinking about it either. But one thing, until we have true interventions, what women can do is to know, like at a detailed, granular level, what their own physiology is. So I would say female physiology is complex. We have to treat it that way. And at the level of the individual, it's incredibly stochastic and incredibly different. And so understanding what your cycles are, both on a daily basis, but also across a menstrual cycle, and using that as your superpower, right? So if you understand carefully how your cycle goes, what kinds of impacts the changes and fluctuations that your body is going through has on your everyday emotions and physical, feelings and well-being and all that kind of stuff. If you understand at a granular level what's happening, then number one, you should be able to detect any changes from normal and immediately flag that for your doctor, and also feel confident interacting with them in a way that, where you don't get gaslit, where you don't get turned away, where you don't get told it's in your head, where you can really advocate for yourself. But also you can turn that stuff around and use it to your advantage, right? Athletes have been doing this for a long time, understanding how to train when based on where they are in their cycle. And every single woman should have that resolution of information about their own bodies and use it. The other thing, so, women have a superpower.
Attention to that superpower.
Yeah.
I mean, so much of, I think, getting great results in most things in life starts from paying attention.
Yeah. The other thing I would say is that for women who are approaching perimenopause, so women in their 30s, 40s, through and past menopause, the biggest, some of the biggest risks for us as we age are increased risk of cardiovascular disease and osteoporosis. Those are the two big ones. And we know how to prevent osteoporosis, right? Part of it is once you get to that point, talking to your doctor about hormone therapy. But another big part of it, especially when you're young, is building and maintaining strong muscles and strong bones. And so knowing, that you're not deficient in vitamin D, getting enough calcium, doing that hard, heavy weightlifting, right? Not small weights, many reps, but heavy weights to exhaustion, which I find so not fun. But, building muscle. And then, there's ways I personally, I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm not giving medical advice, but I personally, I'm about to be 49 and I get DEXA scans every 6 months. And that gives me a real window into not just my bone density and my muscle mass, but also the distribution of muscle. Like the first time I got a DEXA scan, I had different, like my calves were like pretty different. And that made me pay attention in the gym. And it also made me sort of like figure out, it actually turned out to be about driving because I commute. But you know, that like just having that information really cued me to be more aware of what I was doing, how I was moving my body. And a DEXA scan also tells you about visceral fat distribution, which is something that changes, you know, as you get older. So there's a lot of things that, you know, that women can do that are there. It's not going to sync up aging in ovaries with aging in the rest of the body, which is our goal. But until we have the levers to pull to do that, there's a lot that people can do.
One of the labs at Buck pioneered what I think of as a lot of the science on cellular senescence and
Judy,
Judy. Yeah. Has there been any cross-pollination with any investigation so far? Is there a role with senescent cells and
senescence in ovaries is really different from in the rest of the body. And you know, the NIH Common Fund piloted a few years ago this enormous research program, which is across multiple sites all over the US. It's called SENNet, and it's literally to map senescence across all human tissues. So it's a huge, large-scale effort with, you know, dozens of centers and hundreds of scientists. And, you know, and it's an ongoing process to map senescence. And Buck is responsible for it's one of the nodes in the SENNet network. And Buck is responsible for a few tissues, and ovary is one of them. Huh. And so we're actively, you know, mapping senescence in the ovary. And that's an ongoing effort. But what I can say is that it's very different. You know, if you think about, like, if you just step back and consider ovaries as an organ, I don't know if you've ever done that. Probably not.
I honestly no.
Honestly, I hadn't either until I was, you know, shockingly old. But, you know, ovaries are different from other organs because they go through this incredibly dramatic and dynamic, like, physical remodeling with every cycle, right? Like macroscopic remodeling. But then they're also going through these changes at the macroscopic and cellular level that are really important for their function. So it's a really dynamic organ, more dynamic than pretty much every other tissue in your body. And so it's not simple to model. And it's also not simple to think, like senescence, for example. There's so much turnover in ovaries that senescence may not be a big driver of aging. In fact, it seems like, so some of our grantees, Francesca Duncan, for example, she's a member of our center and also has had several grants from us. She discovered that with age, the biomechanical properties of ovaries change. They actually become stiffer with
more
age.
Like the liver, like fibrosis or fibrotic, something.
Yeah, and so it's an increase in fibrosis and a decrease in hyaluronin. And she just published a follow-up study with the postdoctoral person who actually has her own lab now at Washington University. And they just published that anti-fibrotic agents can reverse that stiffness and that change in biomechanical properties and improve function, at least in mice. Now, anti-fibrotic agents are pretty toxic in humans, and so it's not probably going to be, that drug is probably not going to be the thing, but that opens up a whole new area of research, right? Mm. And she got a second grant from us because she had the insight, along with another clinician, that there's a form of ultrasound. It's called shear wave elastography that is used for other organs to look at stiffness. And so they're actually investigating whether we could non-invasively use shear wave elastography, which is a kind of ultrasound, to monitor the stiffness of ovaries in humans and ask whether that correlates with age or function. And if it did, then that would be an amazing, you know, again, it's not an intervention, but an amazing biomarker, right? We're lacking so many things for how to take care of females. Like, we don't have, I should be able to go to my doctor and get some kind of a diagnostic panel every year to let me know where I am until we can change things. And I should at least be able to know where I am in the trajectory, right? But that doesn't exist right now. So,
well, thank you for all the work you're doing to make it come into existence.
I can't think of anything more important.
Yeah.
Can you?
I mean, I think, as you mentioned, like, women have historically been very underrepresented in medical research. I remember at one point, no statin outcome trials had ever been done.
Oh yeah, it's absurd.
Right?
It's so absurd.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's just so overdue, the work that you're doing.
I mean, I think so. Yeah. Yeah. And we're trying to get the whole world involved here, not just us, not just our grantees, not just the scientists, but to get everybody involved.
And thank you for the listeners if they want to know more about what your center's doing and the pioneering work.
Yeah, it's called the Center for Healthy Aging in Women. We just changed the name. And we also just changed the name of our global consortium. So we're in the middle of a website redo, partly because I was telling people not to call them reproductive organs, and we had that word in our name. So the consortium is now called productivehealth.org. So get it, reproductive, but with the RE crossed out. And it's the Center for Healthy Aging in Women at the Buck Institute.
Oh, what a great name. I'm really impressed with a lot of the very descriptive ways you've languaged things, like, the superpower and these other things. So hopefully those sink in.
Hopefully that will sink in. And for the entrepreneurs and for the people out there who want to get involved in different ways, I just last week, I successfully brought a prize concept to the X Prize and competed with lots of other prize ideas across all disciplines, including like climate and deep tech, and won. So the next X Prize is going to be a double X Prize for women's health. So keep an eye out for that.
Wonderful. So thank you so much. Is there any final words you'd like to leave with our listeners today?
Oh gosh, just to get involved, whether that means being an ambassador, so like spreading the word about this. I think most women have never thought of their ovaries beyond menstruation and reproduction, and that's a really important message to get out there. But also, we are an academic center and we are totally dependent on philanthropy. And so if there are any like-minded philanthropists out there who want to support us, here we are.
Well, thank you. Thank you again for spending time with me today.
Yeah, thanks for letting me tell everyone about this stuff.
This podcast is for informational purposes only. The podcast is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. You should not use the information on the podcast for diagnosing or treating a health problem or disease, or prescribing any medication or other treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider before taking any medication or nutritional, herbal, or homeopathic supplement, and with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this or any other podcast. Reliance on the podcast is solely at your own risk. Information provided on the podcast does not create a doctor-patient relationship between you and any of the health professionals affiliated with our podcast. Information and statements regarding dietary supplements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guests' qualifications or credibility. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to therein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.